Welcome to a tutorial on state standards deconstruction. The purpose of this tutorial is to explain why standards are important, to show how teachers and publishers can deconstruct state standards, and finally to assess your own knowledge of state standards deconstructions. In December 2001, Congress passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which requires states to assess students annually from grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. In an effort to define what each state required at each grade level, states independently created standards for their students. Each state posts their current standards on their Department of Education website for parents, teachers, and students to view. Standards come in a variety of names: frameworks, core curriculum, benchmarks. The name of the actual standards don't matter though. What does matter is that teachers are able to deconstruct and understand exactly what each student is expected to know upon completion of that course or grade. This is especially essential because it is the teachers who determine whether the students can demonstrate the knowledge and skills represented in the standards. Along a similar line, educational publication and product companies want to assure states that their products can and do cover and assess students' knowledge and skills represented in the standards. So it is essential that employees and contractors associated with these companies also have the ability to read and deconstruct a standard. Some standards are rather broad and non-specific. In this case, the purpose of the standard is to assess a variety of skills and abilities. Here, it is to use tools, no specific tools are mentioned, to gather precise and accurate data. The method in which the data is organized and collected is also not mentioned. Notice the word appropriate. It is up to the teacher to decide which tools would be appropriate for their classroom and students. For a publication professional, it is important to know what tools would be appropriate to incorporate in their lessons and products. A teacher shouldn't expect a kindergartner to use a triple beam balance. So for both teachers and publication professionals, knowledge of grade level appropriateness is essential. Broad standards are relatively easy to recognize. What is difficult about them is content knowledge must fill in the gaps. A standard that covers interactions in the ecosystem must translate through scientific knowledge to include food chains, competition, prey, and symbiosis, to name just a few interactions. The opposite of this would obviously be standards that are very specific. This state specifically wants the student to be able to determine between two types of cells. What is unknown here is how the teacher may present the knowledge. As most teachers are aware, knowledge requires buildup, so it is possible to teach only a portion of each of this at one time, prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. State standards do not need to be covered all at once. Here is where the knowledge of the publication professional differs. For a publication professional, the verbs do not matter. In identifying one, prokaryotic versus eukaryotic, the student is able to distinguish between the two. A test question may only cover one portion of the standard. However, knowledge of both is needed to know that the nucleus is not in a prokaryotic cell. Specific standards have specific needs. When a standard has a list of required aspects, students must exhibit knowledge for every single one. The standard is not considered covered unless all parts are covered. All forms of energy listed in this standard must be covered. This means by the end of the grade or course, the student must exhibit knowledge on all of these forms of energy, even sound. Now let's go over a few standards for practice. Would you consider this standard broad or specific? It is very broad. Neither the senses nor the types of tools are specified. What this means is that the teacher can determine which sense and which tools would be most appropriate for her classroom. In most cases, in a scientific laboratory or scientific classroom, touch and taste would not be the most appropriate. Similarly, tools chosen can be limited by monetary funds, time, and of course, age appropriateness. Take a second to visualize what coverage of this standard would look like in a classroom. Let's look at another example. Verbs can be tricky in standards. Investigate does not require an actual lab experiment every time. Laboratory time can be used, as can class time, where students are encouraged to discuss their personal experiences with light and with light in materials and surfaces. Because no specific types of surfaces are mentioned, the teacher has a latitude in what may be used. This also means for publication professionals that a wide variety of lessons and test assessment questions can also cover this standard. Let's take some time to look at the standard again. The standard actually has two components, one on how light travels and one on how it is influenced by different types of materials and surfaces. For complete coverage of this standard, both parts must be completely covered in full. Let's look at one last standard before going over some practice questions. This standard has one main idea, comparing modes of inheritance. The state then outlines which modes of inheritance that the student must understand for completion of the standard. The students must understand not only each individual mode, but also be able to understand the similarities and differences among the shown types. For publication professionals, this means that all items must be covered in lessons and that at least two of these must be covered in assessment questions. Before the final assessment, let's look at a couple of standards and the key knowledge required for coverage. A standard will be shown, and you will choose the most important aspect of the standard. Take the time to write down your correct answer to practice before the assessment items. This standard can seem easy at first. At first glance, the standard is about observing size, shape, and weight. However, there is more to it than that. Take a moment to think about what you think the standard's key knowledge is. It's all about how an object's physical property can affect its motion. For this standard, the physical properties were specified to size, shape, and weight. How could a publication professional test the knowledge of this standard? Look at the list of questions below and choose the best option. If you chose C, congratulations, you are correct. A didn't cover enough of the standard. B would be a few steps away. And D, remember, observe is just the verb and not the actual key knowledge. One last practice question before your assessment. The standard may seem a little difficult, but think about exactly what the state wants the student to know and identify the test question that best covers this standard. If you answered A, you are correct. The other items were either based on prerequisite knowledge or too advanced for this standard. You are now ready for the assessment. Good luck! For the sake of the students, it is important that our publication professionals and teachers know and understand what needs to be completed for each course or grade. It is only when teachers are armed with the knowledge of standards can they ensure that no child is left behind.